Hello. Today General Hospital will reveal after a relentless chain of events cast an ominous shadow over Port Charles, where already fragile relationships were torn apart by betrayal and illusion. Michael found himself cornered by a brutal reckoning. For months, he had watched the woman he once called his wife drift away into the arms of another man, believing she had found something more, a promise of renewal, of clarity, of purpose. But Drew, the man Willow had placed her unwavering trust in, turned out to be nothing more than a calculated fraud. Behind the mask of moral integrity and emotional understanding, Drew harbored a darker ambition, one that used Willow's vulnerability as leverage to manipulate key alliances within the Corinthos family's web of influence. He cloaked his selfish intentions beneath a veil of affection, quietly twisting Willow's devotion into a tool for control. And in that storm of emotional confusion, Willow, once so grounded in love and loyalty, sacrificed everything she held sacred, her marriage, her motherhood, her very sense of self. She had walked away from the life she built with Michael, seduced not by passion but by the illusion of purpose. Yet that fantasy shattered when reality returned with a vengeance. Losing custody of her child was not just a legal blow, it was the symbolic price of her misguided choices. And when the final veil was lifted, when she realized that Drew had been exploiting her as part of his scheme to manipulate the Corinthos Foundation's inner workings, the collapse was swift and merciless. Drew disappeared without a word, leaving Willow broken, disillusioned, and forced to confront the magnitude of her mistake. Amid that desolation, it was Michael, the very man she had abandoned, who became the anchor she instinctively reached for. Not because he was convenient, nor because he represented familiarity, but because he had always seen her, truly seen her, with all her complexities and flaws. Michael had loved her with a kind of quiet, enduring faith that Willow had taken for granted. Now, stripped of her illusions and consumed by regret, Willow returned, not with grand gestures, but in silence. She stood not as a lover seeking romance, but as a mother mourning the absence of her child, a fallen partner quietly acknowledging her betrayal, and a lonely woman searching for a trace of the home she once knew. She didn't beg for forgiveness. There were no rehearsed apologies or dramatic confessions. Instead, she spoke through action. In the way she stood from afar watching Daisy at the playground, the way she lingered near Michael's home but never crossed the threshold, the way she offered her help without ever expecting acknowledgement. These gestures, small yet piercing, began to carve a space between them where words failed. Yet in those same moments, it was Sasha's presence that grew more profound. Sasha had never asked for anything. She never demanded to replace Willow or claim a future that wasn't hers to claim. She simply showed up, for Daisy, for Michael, for herself, with a quiet resilience that filled every void Willow left behind. She helped Daisy learn to walk, soothed the child's midnight cries, and reminded Michael how to smile again. It wasn't a whirlwind romance or a cinematic love story. It was healing, gradual, messy, but deeply human. And in every glance, every shared silence, Michael found himself trusting Sasha more. Not just as a friend, or a co-parent, but as someone who had become part of his soul's recovery. He didn't want to admit it, but he had begun to imagine a life with her, a simpler one, honest and undemanding. There were no expectations with Sasha, only understanding. Still, when Willow returned and finally, haltingly, asked him the question that had haunted them both, could he give her another chance? It shattered the delicate equilibrium he had managed to build. Michael was thrown into the most agonizing inner conflict of his life. Love, he realized, wasn't a matter of logic. It didn't reward the one who stayed, nor did it punish the one who left. It simply existed, tangled, bruised, and unpredictable. He spent sleepless nights staring out the window, bathed in the dim glow of the city lights, thinking of the life they had once shared. He remembered Willow's laugh, the curve of her hand in his, the nights they spent whispering about the future. But he also couldn't forget the look in Sasha's eyes whenever he mentioned Willow, that quiet sadness masked behind kindness, the way she always chose to be understanding, even when it hurt. He tried to quantify the pain. Willow had broken his heart, yes, but she had also been the mother of his child, his first true love, his original vision of family. Sasha had mended what was shattered, stood by his side when he couldn't stand on his own, and loved him without condition. Choosing between them wasn't just about romance, it was about identity, about the kind of man he wanted to be. In the end, Michael made the choice that felt both inevitable and devastating. He went back to Willow, not because it was easier, not because it guaranteed happiness, but because something inside him still believed in the family they once were. He told her plainly, the path ahead would not be smooth. Trust couldn't be conjured overnight. Forgiveness was not a light switch. But he would try. For Daisy. For her. For the echoes of the life they had started and the hope that maybe, just maybe, it could be rebuilt. Sasha received the news without protest. She smiled faintly, kissed Daisy's forehead one last time, and packed her things with the grace of someone who had already prepared for heartbreak. There were no ultimatums, no begging, no anger. Just silence, the kind that fills a room when love is quietly surrendered. She left Michael a note, written with trembling hands but a steady heart. It thanked him for allowing her to be a part of something beautiful, even if only for a while. It told Daisy she would always love her. And then she left, not just the home, but the chapter of her life that had taught her both pain and peace. Back in the world they once ruled together, Michael and Willow tried to build anew. They moved slowly, cautiously, careful not to press on unhealed wounds. There were moments of warmth, even laughter, but always with the awareness that their love now carried scars. And somewhere, across town, Sasha walked alone through Port Charles, carrying within her the quiet ache of being loved almost enough, but not quite. The kind of love that doesn't destroy, but doesn't stay either. In the end, no one truly won. Michael got his family back, but not without guilt. Willow regained her place, but at the cost of the woman who had held it all together in her absence. And Sasha, the unsung heart of it all, was left to find her own healing elsewhere, hoping that someday, someone would choose her first. At last, in the stillness of a pale morning as the first golden light of dawn began to seep through the clouds over Port Charles, Michael made a decision that would alter the course of all their lives. It was not a decision made in haste, nor one born purely out of sentimentality. It was the culmination of countless sleepless nights, agonizing reflection, and a heart torn between past loyalties and present truths. With his eyes heavy but resolved, Michael told himself, and then told Willow, that he was willing to try again. Not because she had earned forgiveness, not because time had healed all wounds, but because he wanted something more for Daisy. He wanted his daughter to grow up in a home that felt whole, even if it was forged through pain and imperfection. And deeper still, despite everything Willow had done, despite the breach of trust and the long stretch of emotional silence between them, a part of him still loved her. Not with the same blind innocence of their early days, but with a quieter, weathered kind of love, one that acknowledged pain, yet refused to let it define everything. He made it clear that things could never return to the way they were overnight. The road ahead would be treacherous. Trust would not simply be restored with an embrace or a promise, it would require patience, effort, and humility. But still, he agreed to let her back into his life. He was offering not a fairy tale reunion, but a fragile, final chance. One last attempt to rebuild something that once mattered more than anything in the world to them both. For Sasha, the news came not in the form of dramatic confrontation or a public goodbye, but in the quiet absence that soon filled Michael's home. It was as if the air itself shifted, growing heavier and more still, suffocating in its silence. There were no doors slammed, no screaming matches, no accusations hurled across the room. Just a stillness, one that signaled the inevitable. Michael's heart had chosen, and Sasha, in all her grace and dignity, understood that it hadn't chosen her. She didn't break down in front of anyone. No one saw her cry. But that night, in the same small apartment where she had once shared bedtime stories and laughter with Daisy, where Michael had once poured her a quiet glass of wine after long days filled with uncertainty, she sat in complete silence. Not even the hum of the refrigerator could mask the aching stillness in the room. She walked through each room, touching small remnants of a life she had helped hold together. A forgotten toy on the carpet, a framed photo of Daisy that still sat beside the sofa, the faint scent of Michael's cologne on the throw pillow. All of it a reminder that she had been a part of something real. And now, she was no longer needed. Sasha didn't blame Willow. She probably never truly blamed anyone. It wasn't in her nature to carry bitterness. But there was a deep, buried fury she couldn't ignore, not toward others, but toward herself. For believing she might finally be enough. For thinking that love, when given wholly and selflessly, might be enough to make someone stay. That devotion, loyalty, and unwavering support would be rewarded with permanence. She had told herself not to get too close, not to hope for more, but the heart never listens to logic. With trembling hands, she packed up her things, not in anger, but with the reverence of someone letting go of something sacred. She folded her clothes neatly, boxed up her few belongings, and paused longest in Daisy's room. She sat for a long while in the rocker by the crib, holding a small blanket to her chest. The child had never been hers, not in blood, but Sasha had poured every ounce of maternal love she had into that little girl. And now, she was walking away from the closest thing to family she had known in years. Before she left, she took out a sheet of stationery and penned a note. Her handwriting was steady, precise, almost clinical, but the words bled with emotion. She did not scold, did not plead. There was no mention of regret, only gratitude. She thanked Michael for letting her into his life, for trusting her with his daughter, for allowing her the gift of feeling like she belonged. She wrote that Daisy was a light in her darkest days and that she would always be a part of Sasha's heart, no matter how far life took them apart. She ended it simply. I hope she grows up knowing how deeply she was loved. Even by someone who didn't get to stay. She placed the letter on the kitchen counter, right where Michael would find it when he returned, and then she walked out of the apartment, closing the door behind her with a finality that echoed through her very soul. There was no looking back. Outside, the sun had fully risen, warming the quiet streets of Port Charles. To everyone else, it was just another day. But to Sasha, it marked the end of a chapter written with quiet hope, patient love, and inevitable heartbreak. As she walked into the light of the new morning, she didn't know where she would go next or what came after, only that she had given everything, and now, it was time to begin again. Alone. But still standing. Port Charles, a town long weathered by secrets, betrayals, and second chances, had seen its fair share of tangled romances and bitter heartbreaks. Yet, amid the many love stories that had risen and fallen in its turbulent history, the quiet, intimate unraveling between Michael, Willow, and Sasha carved out a wound that felt deeper and more personal. It wasn't just about love lost or loyalties tested, it was about three people who gave their all, who believed in the redemptive power of love, and who were each forced to walk away with fractured hearts, forever changed by what they had built and what they had broken. When Willow returned to Michael, it wasn't with the bright-eyed hope of rekindling what they once had. That innocence had long been burned away by the flames of her choices, by the moment she allowed herself to believe that Drew offered something Michael couldn't, by the quiet betrayal of abandoning the family they had promised to build together. Her reappearance in his life was steeped in guilt, in humility, in the quiet recognition that she had thrown away something precious in pursuit of an illusion. She didn't come back with grand apologies or romantic gestures. Instead, she brought the weight of her remorse, the understanding that she was no longer the woman Michael had once adored, and that he was no longer the man who had once trusted her without question. Michael welcomed her back not with open arms, but with cautious resolve. His decision to reunite with Willow wasn't born out of blind forgiveness, nor was it rooted in nostalgia. It came from a place deeper than that, from the aching desire to give Daisy a home that felt whole again, to restore a semblance of peace to a life that had felt adrift since Willow left. And, though he hated to admit it, it came from a part of him that still loved her, not with the reckless abandon of their early years, but with a quieter, more measured affection. It was the kind of love that remembered every scar and still dared to hope. He didn't expect perfection from her, and he made it clear that he wouldn't pretend the past hadn't happened. But he was willing to try. Willing to build again, slowly, brick by brick, even if every stone was heavy with memory. Their new life together was not idyllic. It was not free of tension or unspoken resentment. But it was real. And that authenticity, in some strange way, made it more durable than what they had before. They talked more carefully now, listened more intently, navigated conflict with a tenderness that came from knowing how easily it could all fall apart again. They were no longer chasing a fairy tale, they were building something more grounded, more human. Every hug carried the weight of past apologies, every shared laugh an act of quiet redemption. And through it all, Daisy became their anchor. The living, breathing symbol of what they were fighting for. But while Willow and Michael fought to rebuild, Sasha stood on the edge of that reconciliation, watching from a distance as the life she had helped hold together was slowly sealed shut without her in it. Her decision to leave hadn't been made in a single moment. It had been a slow, agonizing realization that no matter how much love she poured into their world, she would never be the one he chose in the end. She had given herself completely, without agenda, without expectation, and yet she had become a footnote in a story that once made her feel like the center. Her heart had quietly broken long before Michael said the words. The moment she saw the way his eyes softened around Willow again, she knew. She had always known. Sasha didn't leave in anger. There were no accusations, no desperate pleas to be reconsidered. That wasn't who she was. Instead, she moved through Michael's house like a ghost, packing the pieces of a life she had so carefully curated with quiet hands. She folded Daisy's tiny clothes, tucked away her own belongings, and whispered silent goodbyes to the corners of a home that had once felt like a sanctuary. She kissed Daisy's forehead while she slept, lingering a moment longer than usual, imprinting the memory of the little girl's breath on her heart. And then she walked away. She left behind a note, written in the early hours of the morning, just before the city stirred to life. It was brief, elegant, and painfully generous. She thanked Michael for the time they shared, for allowing her to step into a space that had once been broken and trusting her to help hold it together. She told him he was a good father, even if he hadn't always been a perfect partner. And she told Daisy she would always love her, from afar, quietly, fiercely. Some goodbyes, she wrote, aren't about walking away. They're about knowing when to let go. Sasha didn't look back. She carried her grief like a sacred burden, walking forward not to forget but to protect the pieces of herself that still believed in love. Her leaving wasn't an act of surrender, but one of survival. She couldn't watch the people she loved most learn to love each other again, not because she wished them harm, but because it would shatter her to witness it up close. She needed distance, silence, and the chance to be whole on her own terms. And Michael, despite the peace he tried to create in his rebuilt family, felt her absence like a phantom limb. There were days when he looked at Daisy and saw the influence Sasha had left behind, in the way she laughed, in the softness she carried. Sometimes he would hear a song playing on the radio that reminded him of the nights he and Sasha spent in the kitchen, dancing in their socks, trying to drown out the noise of the world. He missed her, not just as a companion, but as the calm in the storm, the steady voice that had guided him through the darkest chapters of his life. He never told Willow about the ache. It wasn't fair to her. They were building something fragile, something that required every ounce of his attention. But in the quiet moments, when the world slowed down and the ghosts crept in, he allowed himself to remember. He remembered the way Sasha never tried to possess him, never tried to rewrite his past. She had simply loved him, and that love had changed him forever. In the end, they all moved forward, each carrying a version of the same truth, that love, true, selfless love, is rarely clean, and never simple. Michael held Willow's hand again, and they faced the future as partners. No longer as innocents, but as survivors. Willow did everything she could to show that she was worthy of that second chance, and Michael did everything he could to forgive without forgetting. And somewhere out there, Sasha found a new rhythm to her life, her heart still healing, but her spirit unbroken. Port Charles would continue spinning with new affairs, betrayals, and reunions. But this story, this quiet heartbreak, would live on in the spaces between them. Not loud or theatrical, but deeply, achingly human. A reminder that some scars never fully fade. They only soften with time. In the end, what unfolded between Michael, Willow, and Sasha was not simply a love story, nor a cautionary tale of betrayal and regret. It was a portrait of human fragility, of how even the deepest affections can fracture under the weight of misjudgments, and how healing often demands letting go of what once felt irreplaceable. Their choices, born from heartbreak, hope, and responsibility, rippled far beyond themselves, touching Daisy's future and quietly altering the emotional landscape of everyone involved.